"You're coming with me," said the Mafia boss to the woman beaten for giving birth to daughters. The sound of glass shattering against the wall was all too familiar to Arya as she clutched her newborn daughter to her chest. Her husband's shadow loomed over her, his disappointment at having a second daughter transforming into rage with each passing second. "Worthless," he spat, yanking her by the hair until she cried out. "2 chances to give me a son and you fail both times." His knuckles were already bruised from putting his fist through the nursery wall. The baby's cries only intensified his fury as he grabbed Arya's throat, pinning her against the peeling wallpaper. Her vision began to blur, lungs burning for air, while her precious child wailed helplessly in her weakening grip. "Please," she gasped when he finally released her, both of them collapsing to the floor. "She's innocent." Arya had endured 3 years of his escalating abuse, but never had she feared for her life quite like tonight. The front door splintered open with a deafening crack, making them both freeze. Heavy footsteps approached the nursery, each one measured and deliberate, belonging to someone accustomed to making an entrance. He appeared in the doorway like a specter, tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored black suit despite the late hour. His cold eyes assessed the scene with calculated precision, lingering on Arya's bruised face before settling on her husband. "Richard Bennett," the stranger said, his voice surprisingly soft, yet commanding complete attention. "You've been stealing from my supply chain for months. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Arya's husband stammered excuses, backing away from her as 2 more suited men entered the room. The stranger's gaze returned to Arya, something unreadable flickering across his face when he spotted the infant in her arms. "Please don't hurt my daughters," Arya whispered, summoning what little courage remained. She'd heard rumors about the Blackwood family that controlled half the city, the businesses, the police, the politicians, all under their thumb. The man approached slowly, crouching before her with unexpected grace. "What did he do to you?" he asked quietly, his finger lightly tracing the bruise forming on her cheekbone. His touch was gentle, completely at odds with his reputation. "Nothing I haven't handled before," Arya lied, but her voice cracked as her baby continued to cry. She watched as the man's expression hardened, something dangerous sparking in his eyes as he rose to his full height. "Get up," he commanded, extending his hand toward her. "You're coming with me," said the Mafia boss, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Both of you are." The car ride was silent, save for the occasional whimper from the baby nestled against Arya's chest. She stared out the window as unfamiliar streets gave way to the affluent side of town, her mind racing with terrifying possibilities about what awaited them. "Your older daughter, where is she?" the man asked suddenly, his deep voice breaking through her spiraling thoughts. When Arya explained her mother was watching 3-year-old Lily, he immediately instructed his driver to change course. Within 30 minutes, both her daughters were with her in the back seat of the luxury sedan. The Mafia boss, who had curtly introduced himself as Julian, hadn't spoken another word, his attention fixed on his phone as they drove through iron gates. The estate was massive, sprawling across manicured grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Arya clutched both children closer as they were escorted through marble hallways to a suite larger than her entire apartment. "You'll stay here until I figure out what to do with you," Julian stated flatly, watching as Arya surveyed the lavish surroundings with suspicion. "My personal physician will examine you and the children in the morning." Arya found her voice despite her fear. "Are we prisoners or guests?" she asked, lifting her chin despite the pain it caused. The corner of Julian's mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly, before his stoic expression returned. "That depends on how you behave," he replied, but there was no threat in his tone. "No one will harm you here. My men will bring whatever you need for the children." He turned to leave but paused at the threshold. The silence stretched between them until he finally spoke again. "I recognize the look in your eyes," Julian said quietly. "I grew up watching my mother wear that same expression every day until she finally disappeared." Before Arya could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her daughters and 1,000 questions. She checked every window and door, finding them unlocked, but knowing escape was impossible with 2 small children and nowhere safe to go. The next morning, a kind-eyed doctor tended to her injuries with gentle hands, asking no questions about their cause. When Julian appeared in the doorway, his intense gaze following the doctor's movements, Arya noticed something unexpected: concern. "The bruising will heal, but she has 2 cracked ribs that need time," the doctor reported as if Arya wasn't present. "And she's severely malnourished, both she and the infant." Julian's jaw tightened visibly at this information. "Make a list of everything they need," he instructed before addressing Arya directly. Your husband won't find you here. Whatever you think of me, believe that much. For the first time in years, Arya allowed herself a fragile sliver of hope. Days melted into weeks as Arya gradually regained her strength. She observed Julian from afar, noting how his cold facade seemed to crack whenever her daughters were present, especially little Lily, who followed him like a shadow. Why did you really bring us here? Arya finally asked one evening when she found him alone in his study. The room smelled of expensive whiskey and old books, creating an atmosphere that was both intimidating and strangely comforting. Julian's fingers paused over the documents he'd been reviewing, his expression guarded yet somehow vulnerable. Your husband's debts were just an excuse, he admitted after a long pause. I couldn't leave you there to die. Arya noticed the photograph on his desk, a beautiful woman with kind eyes who bore a striking resemblance to Julian. When she reached for it curiously, he didn't stop her, though his shoulders tensed visibly. My mother, he explained quietly. She endured my father's cruelty for 15 years before she took her own life. His voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened around the crystal tumbler in his hand. That night, Arya woke to screams echoing through the hallway. She found Julian thrashing in his sleep, trapped in some personal hell that made him call out for mercy, his usual composure shattered by unconsciousness. Without thinking, she touched his shoulder gently. His reaction was immediate, grabbing her wrist with crushing force before recognition dawned in his eyes. The vulnerability in his expression was gone in an instant, replaced by shame. You should go, he said roughly, releasing her as if burned. But Arya remained, perching cautiously on the edge of his bed. We all have nightmares, she offered simply. Some of us just suffer them while we're awake. Something unspoken passed between them as dawn broke through the curtains. Julian shared fragments of his childhood, the beatings, the constant fear, watching his mother fade away until she became a ghost long before her death. In turn, Arya revealed how she'd met Richard in college, how charming he'd been until their wedding night, when the mask slipped for the first time, how each disappointment, job loss, money troubles, a daughter instead of a son, had escalated the violence. I became a monster to survive monsters, Julian confessed, his voice barely audible. But seeing you that night, protecting your child despite everything, it reminded me there are things worth saving. The next morning, neither mentioned their conversation, but something fundamental had shifted between them. When Julian's fingers accidentally brushed hers at breakfast, neither pulled away immediately, the brief contact saying more than words could. Autumn painted the estate grounds in fiery hues as Arya ventured outside more frequently, her body healing faster than her spirit. Dr. Reynolds visited weekly, becoming an unexpected confidant who brought news from the outside world. Your husband is telling everyone you kidnapped the children and ran off with a lover, she informed Arya during one checkup. The police aren't looking very hard, though. Julian's influence runs deep in this town. The doctor hesitated before continuing, her voice dropping to a whisper. I've known Julian since he was a boy. I treated his injuries when his father was alive. I've never seen him like this with anyone before you arrived. Arya found herself watching Julian more closely after that, noticing how he'd softened almost imperceptibly, how he'd brought in specialists to help with Lily's delayed speech, how he checked on the baby multiple times each night. One rainy afternoon, she discovered his private gallery, dozens of stunning paintings hidden away from the world. Each canvas revealed a depth of emotion that contradicted everything she'd heard about the cold-blooded Mafia boss. My father would have beaten me to death if he knew, Julian said from the doorway, making Arya jump. Painting was for weaklings, not for the heir to the Blackwood Empire. There was no anger in his voice at finding her there, only resignation. When Arya asked why he stayed in the family business after his father's death, Julian's answer was simple, yet devastating. The Empire doesn't allow resignations, only funerals. Once you're in, there's no walking away. That evening, Julian taught Lily how to play chess, his patience seemingly endless as she repeatedly scattered the pieces. Arya watched them from the doorway, a strange ache blossoming in her chest at this glimpse of normalcy. You could have a different life, she suggested later, after Lily had fallen asleep between them on the sofa. All this power you've accumulated, surely you could use it to break free instead of just surviving. Julian's laugh held no humor. I've built my entire identity on being feared. Without that, I'm nothing. His fingers hovered over a bruise on her wrist that had nearly faded, a final reminder of her former life. You're wrong, Arya said with quiet conviction. I've seen who you are when no one's watching, when you think no one's looking. Her hand covered his. a gesture that felt more intimate than any embrace could have been. The kiss that followed was hesitant, questioning, two damaged people offering comfort that quickly transformed into something neither had expected to find. When they pulled apart, Julian looked as stunned as she felt, touching his lips, as if to confirm what had happened was real. The following morning, Julian's right-hand man, Marcus, arrived with news that shattered their fragile peace. Richard Bennett made contact with the Cortez family, he reported grimly. He's offering information in exchange for their protection. Arya felt the blood drain from her face at the mention of the Cortez name, Julian's most dangerous rivals who controlled the southern territories. The tension in the room thickened as Julian's expression darkened dangerously. "How much does he know?" Julian demanded, his voice returning to the cold tone Arya hadn't heard in weeks. Marcus's gaze flickered briefly to her before answering, enough to cause problems if they believe him. That night, Julian explained the full truth. The Bennetts and Blackwoods shared a bloody history going back decades. Richard had deliberately sought out Arya in college after discovering her maiden name, planning revenge from the beginning. "Your grandfather refused to launder money for my grandfather," Julian explained as they stood by the window watching security patrols circle the property. "So my family destroyed his business, drove him to suicide." Arya's world tilted on its axis as pieces clicked into place. Richard's obsession with her family background, his rage when her parents refused to attend their wedding, his escalating cruelty with each daughter she bore instead of a son to carry on his revenge. Julian unlocked a hidden panel in his study wall, revealing a vintage photograph of two men standing before a bank. "Your grandfather and mine, business partners before the betrayal," he explained, tracing the faded image with his fingertip. The revelation that Richard had meticulously planned their relationship sent Arya spiraling into doubt about every memory they'd shared. "The proposal at the lake house?" she asked brokenly. Julian's silence confirmed what she feared, all orchestrated. Later that evening, Julian received a package containing surveillance photos of Arya's parents' home in Arizona. "He's applying pressure from all angles," Julian explained, immediately dispatching security teams to protect them without their knowledge. When Lily innocently mentioned Daddy's special friends who visited at night, Arya realized with horror that their home had likely hosted Cortez associates while she slept. Richard's network had run deeper than either of them had suspected. "The Cortez family doesn't just want territory," Marcus explained during their emergency strategy meeting. "They want the blackmail material Julian's father collected over decades, evidence that could collapse 3 state governments." Arya discovered an old newspaper article about her grandfather's suicide, the headline calling it "A Tragic End to Banking Scandal." The adjacent column featured a young Gerald Blackwood accepting a Community Leadership Award, his smile chilling in context. "He married me to hurt you," she whispered, the realization like ice in her veins. "And now he's using me again." Julian's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip tight as though she might disappear. Before dawn, gunfire erupted at the eastern perimeter. Julian transformed before her eyes, the gentle man who read bedtime stories to Lily, replaced by the calculated strategist who commanded an empire built on fear and blood. "Take the children to the panic room," he instructed, pressing a loaded handgun into her trembling hands. "If anyone but me tries to enter, don't hesitate." The kiss he gave her felt like both a promise and a goodbye. Hours passed in the reinforced underground chamber, Arya singing softly to keep her daughters calm, while straining to hear any sound from above. When the heavy door finally opened, Julian stood there, his white shirt stained crimson. "It wasn't the Cortez family," he said, voice hollow as he collapsed into a chair. "It was a test. My own captains wanted to see if you were my weakness." His laugh was bitter as he added, "I proved them right by protecting you first." Arya cleaned his wound in silence. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, her mind racing. "We can't stay here," she finally said, meeting his gaze directly. "Not you, not me, not my daughters. We need to disappear, all of us together." Julian spent 3 days locked in his office, emerging only when Arya brought food or when Lily's persistent knocking couldn't be ignored. He was orchestrating something massive, speaking in hushed tones over encrypted calls while transferring millions through offshore accounts. "We have one chance," he finally explained, spreading documents across the dining table after the children were asleep. "I've been preparing an exit strategy for years without realizing it. Shell companies, clean identities, properties off the grid." What Julian proposed was unprecedented, not just leaving his position, but dismantling key parts of his organization from within. He would redirect legitimate businesses to trusted lieutenants while anonymously exposing the illegal operations to federal authorities. Marcus is the only one I trust completely, Julian said, running his hand through his disheveled hair. He'll handle the transition while creating a convincing narrative about my death. The bags under his eyes revealed how little he'd slept. Arya studied the complex plans with growing admiration, recognizing the brilliance behind Julian's strategy. You've thought of everything, she murmured, noting how he'd arranged for her daughters to have new birth certificates and complete medical records. Almost everything, Julian amended, his expression softening momentarily. There's still the matter of us. What happens after we disappear? He reached for her hand across the table, the gesture more tentative than she expected. In preparation for their departure, Julian taught Arya how to handle firearms, a skill she'd never imagined needing. Her hands trembled the first time she held the pistol, but grew steadier with each practice session in the estate's soundproofed basement. Your instinct will be to hesitate, Julian explained, standing behind her to adjust her stance. That moment of doubt could cost your life or your children's. His breath warmed her neck as he guided her through proper breathing techniques. Later that evening, Julian revealed another layer of his exit strategy, a series of damaging files on political figures who had benefited from his family's illegal activities. Insurance, he explained, securing the encrypted drive in a hidden wall safe. Arya found Lily in Julian's closet that night, surrounded by his ties which she'd arranged in rainbow order. When we leave, can Julian be my new daddy? The little girl asked innocently, unaware of how the simple question pierced Arya's heart. Before dawn, Julian received word that Richard had been spotted meeting with several of Julian's competitors. He's offering them territory information in exchange for help finding you, Julian explained, his expression hardening with each new detail. They spent that afternoon destroying evidence of their planned escape, burning documents, wiping hard drives, and removing any trace of their destination from the estate. Leave nothing to chance, Julian instructed as he methodically erased their digital footprint. The question hung between them, heavy with possibilities neither dared voice aloud. Instead of answering, Arya squeezed his hand and simply said, "We'll figure it out together," which seemed enough for now. 2 nights later, Dr. Reynolds arrived with disturbing news. Richard had been asking questions about Julian's household, specifically about any women and children staying there. His alliance with the Cortez family was no longer just a rumor. Julian immediately accelerated their timeline, instructing Marcus to begin the first phase that night, rather than waiting for the weekend. "Tell everyone I'm traveling to Chicago for negotiations," he directed. "That gives us a 48-hour head start." While packing essentials for her daughters, Arya discovered a small box containing photographs of Julian's mother, alongside several of her own family, from before she'd married Richard. He'd somehow retrieved her most precious possessions from her abandoned apartment. The unexpected thoughtfulness of this gesture brought tears to her eyes, and when Julian found her clutching the photos, he simply wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Some anchors are worth carrying," he whispered against her hair. Their plans unraveled the next morning when Julian received a frantic call from Marcus. Someone had accessed the secure server containing their exit strategy. There was a traitor in Julian's inner circle who'd discovered their plans. "We leave now," Julian ordered, his voice eerily calm despite the betrayal. Within 15 minutes, they were in an unmarked SUV with tinted windows, Arya in the back with her daughters while Julian drove, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. Instead of taking the highway as planned, he navigated a complex route through back roads and industrial areas. "They'll be watching all main exits from the city," he explained grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The burner phone Julian carried buzzed with a text from Marcus. Richard had been spotted at Julian's downtown office with 2 Cortez enforcers, demanding to see the boss. They were running out of time faster than anticipated. At a deserted truck stop near the state line, they switched vehicles, abandoning the luxury SUV for a weathered pickup truck with farm equipment in the bed. "Less conspicuous," Julian explained, helping Arya secure the baby's car seat. Rain pounded the windshield as they crossed into the neighboring state, the rhythmic swish of wipers barely audible over Lily's quiet singing in the back seat. For a moment, they almost resembled a normal family on a long road trip. Julian broke the silence as they approached a small mountain town. "There's a cabin about 20 miles from here, off the grid. We can regroup there while Marcus implements our contingency plan." His expression remained vigilant, eyes constantly scanning for threats. A bridge closure forced them to detour through an unfamiliar town, where a police cruiser pulled behind them at a stoplight. Arya's heart hammered against her ribs as Julian casually adjusted his cap lower, maintaining the perfect speed limit when the light changed. "Daddy used to hurt Mommy when the police came," Lily suddenly whispered from the back seat, her small voice carrying a weight no child should bear. Julian's eyes met Arya's in the rearview mirror, silent understanding passing between them. They stopped only once more before reaching the mountains, at a rural convenience store where Julian purchased supplies while Arya remained hidden with the children. He returned with disposable phones, cash, and a stuffed rabbit that made Lily squeal with delight. "My father had escape routes throughout the country," Julian explained as they wound through increasingly remote roads. He was paranoid about rival families, but never imagined his own son would use them against his legacy. The baby developed a fever during the journey, her flushed cheeks and whimpering cries sending waves of panic through Arya. Julian surprised her by pulling over and efficiently preparing infant medication he'd packed, his large hands gentle as he soothed the child. As they climbed higher into the mountains, cell service disappeared completely. "Radio silence is protection now," Julian noted, though Arya could sense his unease at being cut off from Marcus, their only remaining connection to the world they'd left behind. The narrow dirt road leading to the cabin wound through dense forest, branches scraping against the truck's sides like skeletal fingers. As they rounded the final curve, Julian suddenly slammed on the brakes, cursing under his breath. A black sedan was already parked in front of the cabin, its polished surface incongruous against the rustic setting. Before Julian could reverse, the cabin door opened, and Richard stepped onto the porch, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Stay in the truck with the children," Julian instructed, reaching for the gun holstered under his jacket. Arya grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with terror. "He won't be alone," she warned, knowing her husband's calculated nature all too well. She was right. 2 armed men emerged from the tree line behind them, blocking their escape route. Julian assessed their situation with the cool detachment of someone who'd navigated countless dangerous scenarios. But this time, Arya saw genuine fear in his eyes. With a split-second decision that would change everything, Julian fired 3 precise shots, not at Richard or his men, but at the sedan's gas tank. The explosion that followed created the distraction they needed to flee into the forest on foot. Arya clutched her infant daughter to her chest, while Julian carried Lily, both of them running deeper into the woods as gunfire erupted behind them. "There's another safe house," Julian gasped between breaths. "But we have to make it through the night first." They took shelter in an abandoned ranger station as darkness fell, Julian fashioning makeshift beds for the children from his jacket and spare clothing. Despite their exhaustion, neither Arya nor Julian slept, keeping vigil with weapons ready. "I'm sorry," Julian whispered as rain drummed on the metal roof. "I never meant to drag you from one dangerous situation into another." The genuine remorse in his voice made Arya reach for him in the darkness, finding his hand without hesitation. "You gave me something Richard never did," she replied softly. "A choice." The simple truth hung between them as dawn broke through dusty windows, painting the small space in hues of gold and casting Julian's profile in gentle light. The burner phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Marcus. The FBI had raided Julian's headquarters based on anonymous tips, arresting key captains and seizing evidence. Simultaneously, news outlets were reporting Julian Blackwood's death in a car explosion. "It worked," Julian breathed, showing Arya the headlines. "Officially, we're both dead. Richard, too, caught in the same explosion while supposedly meeting with me." His relief was palpable as he pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. 3 months later, under new identities, they settled in a coastal town thousands of miles away. The modest house overlooking the ocean became their sanctuary, far from empires built on blood and homes defined by fear. Their first night in the new house, Arya found Julian on the deck staring at the ocean, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. "I don't know how to be just a man," he confessed without turning. "I've been a weapon for so long." Learning to live without constant vigilance proved challenging for them both. Julian installed state-of-the-art security systems throughout their home, while Arya still checked locks 3 times each night before allowing herself to sleep. The local art community welcomed Julian's talent with enthusiasm, unaware of the darkness that had once consumed his life. Each painting he sold under his new identity felt like another step toward redemption, another piece of his past transformed. When Lily started having nightmares about the bad man finding us, Arya discovered Julian sitting by her bed night after night, telling stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. The tenderness in his voice brought tears to Arya's eyes. Their first Christmas in freedom found them building sandcastles instead of snowmen, the Florida sunshine a stark contrast to the northern winters they'd left behind. Watching Julian teach her daughters to build moats and towers, Arya felt happiness that still seemed forbidden. Dr. Reynolds visited twice yearly, officially on vacation, but really checking their well-being and bringing news from Marcus. During her third visit, she brought final confirmation. The Blackwood Empire had completely collapsed, its remaining assets seized by federal authorities. Julian used his considerable hidden funds to open a small art gallery, displaying his own works under a pseudonym, alongside pieces from local artists. The business thrived, providing legitimate income while allowing him to finally embrace his passion. Arya enrolled in online courses to finish the nursing degree she'd abandoned when marrying Richard. Between classes, she volunteered at a women's shelter, quietly using her experience to help others escape situations she understood all too well. Lily started kindergarten, blossoming in the absence of tension that had marked her early years. The baby, now a toddler, knew only love and security, too young to remember the circumstances that had brought their unlikely family together. Some nights, Arya still woke gasping from nightmares about Richard finding them. On those occasions, Julian would hold her until her breathing steadied, sometimes sharing his own lingering fears about his former life catching up to them. But as seasons changed and years passed, those moments became increasingly rare. The sharp edges of their past gradually softened, like sea glass tumbled by persistent waves, until even the most jagged fragments became something beautiful. When Julian proposed on a moonlit beach 3 years after their escape, Arya didn't hesitate. The simple gold band he offered held no grand diamonds or flashy symbols of the wealth he'd left behind. Just an engraving that read, "Choice, not chance." Thank you all for following this story to its conclusion. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is essential for me to continue creating content here.